Pravit moi druzy. Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. I'm a professor who tries to help you have some context about what's going on in the war in Ukraine. So a number of episodes or videos ago, I did this reaction video to Scott Ritter, where I let him talk about what he was talking about, and then I would give the other side of the equation. And then same thing here, who is Scott Ritter, where he's talking to Judge Napolitano, and they're echoing the 7-1 losses kind of thing. And I'm trying to understand the guy, right? I don't know him personally, and particularly with this video, I had a lot of people say, I thought he was a U.S. Marine. Why is he echoing Russian talking points? Like, who is this guy? What's he about? Okay, well, I'm trying to get to the bottom of that. So here we're going to look at some background on him. I think I can explain a little bit about him. And if I get it wrong, I get it wrong. I'm going to try to be kind in my analysis of him, to be respectful and understanding, so that you can understand why he's saying what he's saying. Okay, so he was a United States Marine Corps intelligence officer. He was a United Nations Special Commission weapons inspector as well. Now, there's other bad things on here about him in his personal life. I don't need to pollute or poison the well in order to talk about the things that he says, and so I'm going to leave out the issues in his personal life, and just like maybe he made some bad judgment, and maybe that's a bigger part of the problem. I don't know. But what I want to talk about is what's going on with him and how he sees the world and why he sees the world the way he does. So he was a junior military analyst during Desert Storm. He served as a member of UNSCOM, overseeing disarmament of weapons of mass destruction. And that's really where he made his name, in Iraq from 1991 to 1998. At that point, he resigned in protest. Now, during the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, he wrote a series of opinion pieces for Russian state media outlet RT. And you go in and you go to RT and you type in his name in the search box, you will see him come up quite a bit. Now, why does he think this way? Well, he graduated from Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, with a Bachelor's of Art in the History of Soviet Union. Okay, so at this point, what we know about him is he's a bit of a Russophile, right? He is already inclined to appreciate, say, the Soviet Union, or see the Soviet Union, or try to understand the Soviet Union, and perhaps he does understand the Soviet Union better than some of his superiors for whom he's working. Let's say. United States Marine Corps, he served this capacity for about 12 years. He served as the lead analyst for the Marine Corps Rapid Deployment Force concerning the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and Iran-Iraq War. So he's got a pretty decent background and resume. During Desert Storm, as a Marine captain, he served as a ballistic missile intelligence analyst under General Norman Schwarzkopf. Ritter filed multiple internal reports challenging Schwarzkopf's claim that the U.S. had destroyed as many as 16 of Iraq's estimated 20 mobile Scud missile launchers, arguing that they could not be confirmed. He might have been right. I don't know. But he's shown a penchant for being willing to challenge top brass. In 1992, Ritter was quoted in New York op-ed saying no mobile Scud launchers were destroyed during the war. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm piecing a couple things together. Already kind of has a bent toward the Soviet Union in his studies, already willing to challenge authority, so let's keep going. And again, I'm not denigrating the guy. I mean, I disagree with some of the things that he says, certainly, but I'm trying to understand him. January 1998, Ritter's inspection team in Iraq was blocked from some weapon sites by Iraqi officials who stated that information obtained from these sites would be useful for future planning of attacks. UN inspectors were ordered out of Iraq by the United States government shortly before Operation Desert Fox attacks began in December of 1998. UN weapons inspectors were thereafter denied access to Iraq. That's before the second Gulf War. That's after the first Gulf War, 91. This is 98, and before the re-invasion. Now, when the United States and UN Security Council failed to take action against Iraq for their ongoing failure to cooperate fully with its inspectors, which is a breach of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1154, Ritter resigned from the United Nations Special Commission on August 26, 1998. Okay, so he resigned in protest when he couldn't actually do his job. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a somewhat admirable thing, but it might be taken a little bit far. In his letter of resignation, Ritter said the Security Council's reaction to Iraq's decision earlier that month to suspend cooperation with the inspection team made a mockery of the disarmament work. Okay, I think that's fair so far. In the letter, he said, we really needed the Security Council to step in a meaningful fashion and seek to enforce the resolutions that they were not complying with. On September 3rd, 1998, several days after his resignation, Ritter testified before the United States Senate Committee on Armed Services and the United States Committee on Foreign Relations that said he resigned his position, quote, out of frustration that the United Nations Security Council was failing to enforce the post-Gulf War resolutions designed to disarm Iraq. During the testimony on September 3rd, Ritter was asked by Senator Joseph Biden, plot thickens some, about his position on inspections, which Biden criticized as confrontation-based policy. Biden questioned if the inspector was trying to, quote, appropriate the power to decide when to pull the trigger of military force against Iraq, with Biden stating that the Secretary of State would also have to consider the option of allies, the United Nations Security Council, and public opinion before any potential intervention in Iraq. Now, that's actually a legitimate point, right? What the weapons inspector can or can't do, he is supposed to inspect and report back. He's not supposed to, create another war, and the Secretary of State, who is going to have to weigh all the evidence. Maybe he's done a terrible job in not being able to get the guy in, but he has to weigh other options, and that's a legitimate point. Later on, Biden said that the decision was, quote, above Ritter's pay grade. Okay, Ritter's testimony was disputed by Richard Butler, chief UN arms inspector on Iraq, who claimed Ritter made factual errors and harmed UNSCOM's mission. Now, I don't know who's right or who is wrong, but there's apparently a dispute back and forth. Butler, Ritter's former UNSCOM boss, said that Ritter, quote, wasn't prescient, unquote, in his predictions about weapons of mass destruction, saying, quote, when he was the alpha dog inspector, then by God, there were more weapons there, and we had to go find them, a contention for which he had inadequate evidence. And when he became a peacenik, then it was all complete BS, start to finish, and there were no weapons of mass destruction. And that also was a contention for which he had inadequate evidence. Okay, so what we know about him is that he studied Russian, he has background as a Marine, he was willing to speak truth to power as he saw it, but it seems in his profile like maybe he thinks he's right all the time. And one of the questions that I got was really interesting, where people would say, like, he's got to be on the Russian payroll, he's got to be, a shill for Russia. He doesn't really believe this. No, I think he doesn't need to be paid, and he really does believe this, and that's who he is. He believes he's right over whatever the other evidence might be. And again, I'm trying to be kind. Now, in his world, he's believing Russian media, and so if he's in an echo chamber, and we could be in echo chambers on the other side, we have to be careful about that. If he's in an echo chamber believing that 7-to-1 figure seems believable, because they put out this kind of 10-to-1 kind of figures regularly on RT. So that's where he's coming from. Now, I'm not going to stop there. Let's go on and read a little bit more. There was an article on Scott Ritter's Other War in the New York Times. I downloaded it from our library, and I went through some things. And I just want to share just these little bits. And I'm not going to talk about the personal stuff. I want to focus exclusively again on what he believes and why he believes it. Okay, it said Scott Ritter is one of the most controversial figures in American foreign policy for the past decade and a half. It was Ritter, a former Marine major and United States weapons inspector in Iraq, who quit the UN inspection team in 1998 and railed against Saddam Hussein's government for misleading inspectors and scamming the international community. And it was Ritter who then did an about-face and emerged during the long period that led to the war as the loudest and most credible skeptic of Bush administration's contention that Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction. So he's been at odds with Schwarzkopf, with Bush, with Biden. But again, the common thread is he believes that he's right. I don't think that he's a shill for the Russians. I don't think he's like on the payroll. Now here's even more interesting stuff. It's tragic, Seymour Hersh, the New York Times investigative reporter, said when we spoke this fall. Hersh grew close to Ritter in the late 90s and appeared as a character witness at his trial in Pennsylvania last April. Quote, he understands the Arab world in a way few Westerners I know do. You have no idea how smart he is. Now, who is Seymour Hersh? Well, I asked that question just a few weeks ago. Who is Seymour Hersh? He's the guy that was saying that Zelensky stole $400 million, and he had no real proof. He had some unnamed source who was saying this. Now, Hersh was a legitimate journalist, the guy that brought forward the accusations of the My Lai massacre, and he was also involved in Watergate and some other things, but he's the kind of guy that always sees a scandal everywhere, and there's got to be some hidden conspiracy. Now, if you called the last 3 recessions, and I said this in this video, and it's worth watching if you haven't seen it yet, if you called the last 3 recessions, wow, that's amazing that you could predict the last 3 recessions. But if you called 12 of the last 3, that's right, you called them 12 different times, only 3 came to bear, not so good. And that's the kind of thing that Seymour Hersh is doing. But you'll notice that Seymour Hersh is chummy, according to this article, with Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter, Douglas Macgregor, Seymour Hersh, they're all on the same page. They all seem to have this anti-government stance. Now, there's one more piece of the puzzle that I want to talk about. Ritter's Georgian-born wife, Marina, whom he met as a weapons inspector in Russia in 1989, no need to read the rest of the sentence. So, he's a Russophile who married a Russian wife or Georgian wife in Russia, so their sympathies are certainly with Russia, who believes this stuff inherently, not just believes this stuff, but believes his view of this is right. Now, again, I believe that my view supporting Ukraine is right, and I'm trying to explain it. But I'm also trying to triangulate on facts in a more meaningful way, I think. So let me bring you back to 1998 to this Senate testimony where Scott Ritter was being read the Riot Act by Joe Biden. Here we go.
Respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone.
Now, I gotta say, Biden's right. I'm not a big Biden fan, but on this point, he's right. The weapons inspector is supposed to do his job to inspect the weapons. If he can't do it, then he tells his boss, and then it's somebody above him that's responsible for this. But he's not supposed to be pushing this. He's supposed to be doing his job, and the Secretary of State is ultimately responsible for this.
Or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip.
Now, that's not very kind to Scott Ritter, but Biden is right. But I think Scott has a chip on his shoulder from that day. I mean, that's just my read of it. I could be wrong. Maybe he's found forgiveness and found his zen, but I think that's another piece of the puzzle.
Because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector, you didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in. So what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys.
Now, that was not the kindest way of approaching this, so I understand the chip that he might actually have on his shoulder. That doesn't mean that his propaganda's right. I'm just trying to understand him.
Go get him. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job is a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And
Okay, and she says for that I thank you. Now, but it was not the kindest way of going about doing this. But okay, so I think that helps us understand who Scott Ritter is, why he has the positions that he or takes the position that he has. I'll end with his last thing, and that is this: if you are like, he might be right about his position, but I would question it only because if you're saying the same thing that RT and TASS are saying, you should question it. Like, you should be wondering, Russian state propaganda says X. If I happen to line up with that particular position, maybe I ought to reevaluate. Okay, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time. Thank you for enduring with me through this to try to make sense of who Scott Ritter is and how he acts. Thank you for the coffees. Thank you for the super thanks. Thank you for being willing to listen to this argument. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.